I never expected to inherit anything. My parents had passed away when I was young, and I had grown up in modest circumstances, always working hard to support myself. My Aunt Victoria, on the other hand, was a force of nature, a self-made billionaire who had built Langley Enterprises from the ground up. She was known for her sharp business acumen, her ruthlessness in boardrooms, and, despite her cold exterior, a hidden streak of kindness that only a few ever got to see. She never had children of her own, but she had plenty of nieces and nephews, most notably my cousins Oliver, Charlotte, and Julian. They had grown up in wealth, attending the best schools, traveling the world, and enjoying every privilege money could buy. Unlike me, who had always been on the outside of their world, struggling to make ends meet, they had been groomed for power. Still, Aunt Victoria had always treated me kindly. She would invite me over for dinner on occasion, and though we weren't particularly close, I respected her deeply. I never imagined that when she passed away, it would change my life forever. When the news of her death came, I was devastated. She had suffered a sudden stroke, and despite all her wealth, there was nothing that could have saved her. Her funeral was a grand affair, attended by business tycoons, celebrities, and politicians. My cousins played the part of grieving relatives well, but even as I stood by her grave, I could feel their calculating gazes. I wasn't sure why, but something told me I was about to be dragged into something much bigger than I anticipated. 2 weeks later, we gathered at her lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The room was heavy with anticipation. Oliver, the eldest cousin, sat with his arms crossed, looking smug. Charlotte tapped her manicured nails against the mahogany table, her expression unreadable. Julian, the youngest, smirked at me as if he already knew the outcome. Mr. Caldwell, Aunt Victoria's longtime lawyer, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat before beginning. He read out a few smaller bequests, charitable donations, gifts to trusted employees, but then came the part that changed everything. To my beloved niece, Emma Harper, I leave the entirety of Langley Enterprises. I trust her to carry on my legacy with intelligence, dignity, and the strength I have always seen in her. The room went silent. Then, all at once, my cousins erupted. "This has to be a mistake," Oliver snapped. "Emma? She doesn't know the first thing about running a business." "This is absurd," Charlotte agreed. She barely even knew Aunt Victoria. Julian laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, Caldwell. Tell us this is some kind of joke." But the lawyer simply folded his hands on the desk. "It is no joke. Miss Harper is the rightful heir to Langley Enterprises, as per Miss Langley's final wishes." I was too shocked to speak. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear anything else. I had come expecting nothing, and yet here I was, the owner of $1 billion empire. My cousins weren't finished. They turned their attention to me, their outrage morphing into something more dangerous, calculated persuasion. "Emma," Oliver said, suddenly smiling as if we were the best of friends, "you have to see how unexpected this is. Aunt Victoria must have been confused when she made this decision." Charlotte nodded, her voice softer now. "Exactly. No one is saying you don't deserve something, but running a company of this scale, that's a lot to handle. We've been preparing for this our whole lives. You don't even have a background in corporate leadership." Julian leaned in, voice smooth as silk. "Look, we're family. We can help you. We'll manage everything while you settle in. No pressure, no stress." I felt like I was drowning. They were throwing everything at me. Doubt, guilt, manipulation. And the truth was, I did feel overwhelmed. What did I know about running a business of this magnitude? I had spent my life working ordinary jobs, barely making enough to scrape by. Was I really capable of leading an empire? Sensing my hesitation, Oliver seized the moment. He pulled out a stack of papers from a sleek leather folder and slid them across the table. "This is just a temporary arrangement," he assured me. "A transition period, if you will. You'll still own everything, of course, but we'll handle the management side of things for now. It's the smart move." I hesitated, staring at the papers. My name was already printed on them. All I had to do was sign. Caldwell shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "Ms. Harper, you are under no obligation to sign anything today. You may take time to review—" "She trusts us," Charlotte interrupted smoothly. "We're her family. We're just trying to help." The pressure was suffocating. The three of them watched me intently, their confidence unwavering. I wanted to believe they had my best interests at heart. After all, they were family, weren't they? And the truth was, I was scared, terrified of failing, of proving them right. So I did the one thing I would later regret more than anything else. I picked up the pen and signed. The moment the ink dried, the atmosphere in the room shifted. My cousins exchanged quick glances, and for the first time I saw it. The triumph in their eyes. I had just given away my power, and they knew it. The next few weeks were a blur. At first, nothing seemed to change. I was still technically the owner, still welcomed into the offices of Langley Enterprises with respect. But gradually, things started slipping away. My executive privileges were revoked. Decisions were made without my input. My cousins held meetings behind closed doors, and when I asked to be included, I was told I didn't need to worry about the details. Then came the demotion. One day I arrived at the office to find that my spacious temporary office had been reassigned. Instead, I was placed in a small windowless room tucked away on a lower floor. My title was changed from CEO to assistant to the executives. My new job? Administrative work, running errands, fetching coffee. I protested, of course. I stormed into Oliver's office demanding answers. He only smiled. "Emma, you said yourself you're not ready to run a company," he reminded me. "We're just helping you. You should be grateful." Charlotte and Julian backed him up, gaslighting me at every turn. "You did agree to this," Charlotte would say with a sympathetic smile. "We're just making things easier for you." I was trapped. I had signed away my power, and now I was nothing more than an afterthought in the company I legally owned. The worst part? No one questioned it. The employees, the board members, everyone assumed I had simply stepped back voluntarily, that I wasn't capable. My cousins had played their roles perfectly, ensuring that I had no allies, no support. For weeks I swallowed my pride and did what was asked of me. I worked late hours organizing their files, getting their coffee, scheduling their meetings. They treated me like a glorified maid, humiliating me in every way they could. But what they didn't know, what they never expected, was that I was paying attention. I started seeing things they thought I was too insignificant to notice, numbers that didn't add up, emails they thought I wouldn't understand, conversations they didn't think I was listening to. And that was the moment everything changed. Because while they had taken everything from me, they had underestimated one thing. I wasn't going to stay down. I was going to take back what was mine. The days blurred into weeks, and my role at Langley Enterprises became increasingly humiliating. My cousins had made it clear I was nothing more than an afterthought in the company I legally owned. Every morning I walked into the gleaming skyscraper bearing my aunt's name, yet no one treated me like I belonged. The executives barely acknowledged me, the assistants avoided eye contact, and the employees had been fed a well-crafted lie that I had willingly stepped back from leadership because I wasn't ready. I wanted to fight back, but I had made a critical mistake. I had signed over power to Oliver, Charlotte, and Julian without understanding what I was really giving away. Now I was a powerless figurehead while they ran my company like it was their birthright. At first I considered quitting altogether. What was the point of staying when I was being treated like a glorified secretary? But something in me refused to walk away. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was sheer stubbornness, or maybe it was the nagging voice in my head that told me Aunt Victoria had chosen me for a reason. So instead of leaving, I started paying attention. I made myself invisible, moving quietly through the office, listening, observing. My cousins had assumed I was too naive, too weak to challenge them, and they had gotten comfortable. Too comfortable. It started with little things. Documents left on desks, conversations half heard as I delivered their coffee. The more I listened, the more uneasy I became. Langley Enterprises had always been one of the most stable and respected companies in the industry. My aunt had built it with precision, ensuring its long-term success. Yet, in just a few short months under my cousin's leadership, cracks had started to form. The first red flag was the financials. One afternoon, while organizing files in Oliver's office, I noticed an open spreadsheet on his computer. The numbers didn't make sense. Huge amounts of money were being funneled into vague investment projects. I memorized a few key figures before he returned, brushing past me as if I were invisible. Later that night, I researched those investments. What I found made my stomach turn. My cousins were using company funds to finance their personal ventures. Failed startups, luxury real estate, even private gambling debts. They weren't just mismanaging Langley Enterprises, they were draining it. I needed proof. The next few weeks, I carefully gathered evidence. I stayed late under the guise of organizing paperwork, scanning documents, forwarding suspicious emails to a private account. I befriended a few assistants who, despite their fear of my cousins, had noticed the reckless spending. They told me about secret meetings, hushed conversations, and the growing tension among senior executives. The board was beginning to ask questions. But Oliver, Charlotte, and Julian had an answer for everything. They spun elaborate excuses, masking their financial recklessness as strategic expansion. They silenced anyone who dared to challenge them, either with bribes or the threat of being pushed out. One evening I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Charlotte was on the phone in the executive lounge, unaware that I was in the corner, cleaning up a coffee spill. "No, the board won't be a problem," she said, swirling her wine glass lazily. "They're still under the impression that Emma is the real owner. As long as she stays quiet, we can keep shifting funds without anyone questioning it." I froze. The board still thought I was in charge? My name was still on the official documents? A realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't powerless. My cousins had manipulated me into thinking I had no control, but in reality, they had been hiding behind my name this entire time. If the company took a fall, it wouldn't be them who took the blame. It would be me. They had set me up to be the scapegoat. A chill ran through me, but along with the fear came something else. Rage. They had stolen my company, humiliated me, and now they were planning to destroy everything my aunt had built, using me as their shield. They thought I was weak. They thought I would never fight back. They were wrong. The next morning, I met with Aunt Victoria's old lawyer, Mr. Caldwell. He had been distant ever since I signed away control, likely disappointed in my naivety. But when I walked into his office with a file full of damning evidence, his expression changed. "Miss Harper," he said slowly, flipping through the documents, "where did you get all this?" "I work for the people stealing from me," I said bitterly. "They don't bother hiding anything when they think I'm too stupid to understand." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I warned you about signing that agreement, Emma." "I know," I admitted, "and I made a mistake. But there has to be a way to fix this." Caldwell was quiet for a long time, reading through the details. Then he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. "There is one thing," he said at last. "Your aunt included a contingency clause in her will. If there was ever proof of gross mismanagement, the power could be transferred back to you, but it would require the board's approval." I nodded, already forming a plan. Then I need to get the board on my side. Caldwell studied me, as if seeing me for the first time. "You'll be going up against your cousins. They won't go down without a fight." "I know," I said, "but I'm done being their pawn." For the next few weeks I prepared in secret. I gathered more evidence, documenting every shady transaction, every lie. I reached out to key board members, subtly planting seeds of doubt about my cousin's leadership. And then, when I was ready, I made my move. At the next quarterly board meeting, I walked into the room, not as an assistant, not as a forgotten heir, but as the rightful owner of Langley Enterprises. My cousins didn't know it yet, but their reign was about to end. The day of the board meeting arrived, and for the first time in months, I didn't walk into Langley Enterprises as an invisible assistant. I walked in as someone with a purpose. For weeks, I had meticulously gathered evidence. Financial records, emails, and testimonies from employees who had grown frustrated with my cousin's reckless leadership. I had also spent time carefully speaking with board members, subtly planting seeds of doubt about the company's direction. Some had already noticed the problems, but were either too afraid or too unsure to act. Today, I would give them no choice. I arrived at the conference room early, my nerves electric but controlled. The long glass table gleamed under the soft lights, and the massive windows provided a panoramic view of the city skyline, a view that, if my cousins had their way, would soon belong to someone else. The highest bidder. Slowly, the board members began to file in, exchanging pleasantries as they took their seats. Some nodded at me politely, though their expressions held curiosity. It had been a long time since I had been present at one of these meetings, and they had been led to believe I had voluntarily taken a back seat. Then came Oliver, Charlotte, and Julian. They entered together, as always, exuding confidence. Oliver adjusted his cufflinks, Charlotte tossed her sleek hair over her shoulder, and Julian smirked as he slid into his chair. They didn't even acknowledge me. To them, I was already defeated. Oliver, as the acting CEO, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for being here today. We have several matters to discuss, including our latest expansion efforts and upcoming strategic investments." I leaned back in my chair, waiting. Let them feel comfortable. Let them think they were in control. The meeting proceeded as expected, with Oliver presenting carefully polished reports designed to paint a picture of a thriving company. He spoke about bold new ventures and exciting opportunities, masking the reality of their reckless spending. Charlotte chimed in about restructuring that would cut costs, meaning layoffs for hard-working employees. Julian sat back, interjecting only when necessary, playing the role of the charming negotiator. Finally, as they were about to move on, I cleared my throat. "If I may," I said, my voice steady but firm. Heads turned. My cousins finally looked at me. Surprise flickered across Oliver's face before he smoothed it over with a condescending smile. "Of course, Emma," he said. "Do you have something to add?" I placed a thick folder on the table and slid it forward. "Actually, I do. I'd like to discuss the financial irregularities that have been occurring under your leadership." Silence. Oliver's smile froze. Charlotte's fingers tightened around her pen. Julian's smirk twitched. "Irregularities," Oliver repeated smoothly. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." I opened the folder, pulling out several printed documents. These records show substantial amounts of company funds being redirected into personal ventures, ones that have nothing to do with Langley Enterprises, failed startups, real estate deals under your names, even a private equity fund that conveniently disappears into offshore accounts. Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Some of the board members exchanged wary glances while others leaned forward, intrigued. Oliver let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Emma, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Business is complex, and sometimes—" "I also have email correspondences," I interrupted, clicking a remote to bring up a slide on the screen. "Here, for example, is an exchange between Julian and a private investor about liquidating Langley assets to cover personal gambling debts." Julian's smirk vanished. Another slide. And this, Charlotte instructing our accounting department to adjust quarterly reports before presenting them to the board. Charlotte's face went pale. I turned to the board. "For months, I've been watching as my cousins have siphoned company money for their own gain, while feeding you manipulated reports to cover their tracks. But what's worse is that they've been using me as their shield. My name is still on every official document. If this company goes under, if fraud investigations begin, guess who takes the fall? I let the weight of my words settle. Not them. Me. The room was dead silent. Then one of the older board members, Mr. Whitmore, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "These are very serious accusations, Miss Harper. Do you have sufficient proof to back them?" I slid another stack of documents across the table. Every transaction, every manipulated report, witness testimonies from employees who were coerced into covering up the discrepancies. I folded my hands on the table and met Oliver's gaze head-on. "Shall I continue?" Oliver's mask of calm cracked. He sat back, glancing at Charlotte and Julian. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in their eyes. "Emma," Charlotte tried, her voice softer now, "we're family. You don't want to do this." I tilted my head. "That's funny. Because when I signed that agreement, when you stripped me of my authority, when you humiliated me, did you ever stop and think, Emma's family, maybe we shouldn't do this to her?" She had no response. Oliver turned to the board, his voice tight. "This is a blatant attack. Emma clearly doesn't understand the intricacies of corporate finance. These are normal business practices." "Fraud is not a normal business practice," I cut in, "and the board has the right to vote on this." Mr. Whitmore nodded. "Indeed we do." He looked around at the others. "I move to take a formal vote on whether or not Oliver, Charlotte, and Julian Langley should be removed from their positions, effective immediately." Julian shot up from his chair. "You can't do this." But I saw it in the faces of the board members. The doubt, the hesitation, the realization that they had placed their trust in the wrong hands. Votes were cast. One by one, hands were raised. When the final count was announced, it was over. Oliver, Charlotte, and Julian were officially removed from their roles at Langley Enterprises. Security was called to escort them out. Charlotte protested until the very end. Oliver threatened lawsuits, and Julian cursed under his breath. But none of it mattered. I had won. As they were led out of the room, Oliver turned to me, his eyes burning with resentment. "You think this makes you powerful? You don't have what it takes to run this company." I met his gaze, unshaken. "Watch me." And with that, I took my rightful seat at the head of the table. I was no longer a forgotten heiress. I was the CEO of Langley Enterprises. The boardroom was silent as I sat at the head of the table. The chair, the one that had belonged to my Aunt Victoria, felt heavier than I imagined. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but beneath it there was something else, a sense of justice, a sense of reclaiming what had always been mine. Oliver, Charlotte, and Julian were gone. Security had escorted them out, ignoring their protests and threats. The very people who had mocked me, who had treated me like nothing more than a pawn, had been stripped of their power in the same room where they had once ruled over me. But my work wasn't done yet. The board members were watching me now, their expressions a mix of curiosity, apprehension, and, for some, grudging respect. I knew what they were thinking. I had exposed my cousin's corruption, but did I have what it took to actually lead? I took a deep breath and straightened my posture. "Thank you all for your time today. Now that the immediate matter has been dealt with, I'd like to discuss the future of Langley Enterprises." Mr. Whitmore, the most senior member of the board, leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Ms. Harper, while I won't deny that today's revelations were alarming, we still need to address the question at hand. You've successfully removed your cousins, but what are your intentions for the company?" I had expected this. The board was still uncertain about me. And why wouldn't they be? I had been absent from the company for months, written off as an incapable heiress. I needed to prove that I was more than that. I met their gazes one by one. My intentions are simple. I want to restore this company to the vision my aunt had for it. Under my cousin's leadership, Langley Enterprises was being drained for personal gain. That ends today. Some of the board members exchanged glances. A few nodded slightly. I understand that some of you may have doubts about my ability to lead, I continued, choosing my words carefully. And I won't pretend I have years of experience in corporate management. But what I do have is an understanding of what this company stands for. Langley Enterprises was built on integrity and innovation. My aunt didn't choose me as her successor on a whim. She saw something in me, and I intend to honor her trust. Silence. Then one of the board members, a woman named Evelyn Carter, spoke up. You've made a compelling case for why your cousins were unfit to lead, but what makes you the right choice, Miss Harper? I had expected this question, too. Because I'm willing to fight for this company, I said simply. I just proved that today. That was the moment I saw it. The shift. The realization among the board members that I wasn't the naive, powerless girl they had assumed I was. I had stood up to my own family, risked everything to expose the truth. And in the corporate world, that kind of strength was respected. Mr. Whitmore finally nodded. Very well, Miss Harper. You have my vote of confidence. One by one, the other board members agreed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make it clear that I wasn't going anywhere. The meeting ended, and as the board members filed out, a few stopped to shake my hand. Others still seemed skeptical, but that was fine. I wasn't here to win them over in a single day. I had time. As the last of them left, I sat back in the chair, exhaling slowly. I had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I dove headfirst into the work of undoing the damage my cousins had caused. Their fraudulent transactions had left deep scars on the company's financials, and it took every ounce of effort to stabilize things. I worked late into the nights, learning everything I could. I met with department heads, listened to their concerns, and assured them that real changes were coming. I reinstated key employees who had been unfairly pushed out under my cousin's reign and cut ties with corrupt partners who had enabled their schemes. The press, of course, had a field day with the scandal. Headlines ranged from Langley Empire shakeup, the forgotten heiress takes over, to corporate coup, how Emma Harper defeated her own family. At first I hated the attention, but then I realized something. The media frenzy gave me an opportunity. I used it to send a clear message. Langley Enterprises was under new leadership, and it would no longer be run by greed. Investors were wary at first, but as they saw the company stabilizing, confidence returned. Stocks that had dipped during the uncertainty slowly climbed back up. Clients who had considered pulling out renewed their contracts. Employees who had once walked on eggshells under my cousins now worked with a sense of purpose. I still faced challenges. Some of the board members still doubted me. Competitors saw my takeover as a weakness and tried to exploit it. And my cousins, well, they weren't finished with me yet. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I found Oliver waiting for me outside the building. He leaned against a sleek black car, arms crossed. Unlike the last time I had seen him, furious and humiliated as security dragged him out, he looked calm. Too calm. "Emma," he greeted smoothly. "I have to say, I underestimated you." I stopped a few feet away, keeping my expression neutral. "That was your first mistake." A flicker of irritation passed through his eyes before he smiled again. "You've won, for now. But don't think this is over. You might have the company, but you don't have the experience. Sooner or later, you'll make a mistake. And when you do, the board will turn on you just as quickly as they turned on us." I tilted my head, studying him. "Is that why you're here? To warn me?" He pushed off the car, taking a step closer. "No, I'm here to offer you a deal." I raised an eyebrow. "A deal?" "Give me a seat back at the table," he said smoothly. "You need someone who understands this business. We don't have to be enemies, Emma." I almost laughed. After everything he had done, stealing from the company, humiliating me, trying to use me as a scapegoat, he had the audacity to ask for a way back in? I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You don't get it, do you, Oliver? I'm not the same person you walked all over. You lost, and there's no coming back from that. First time I saw it. Realization dawning in his eyes. He had truly lost. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. Months passed, and the company continued to grow under my leadership. The first year was the hardest, filled with difficult decisions and long nights. But every challenge only made me stronger. Langley Enterprises became a different company. Not one driven by greed and deception, but by real innovation and integrity. Employees who had once feared for their jobs now thrived. And me. I had gone from being the forgotten heiress to a leader in my own right. Not because of my last name, not because of an inheritance, but because I had fought for it. Aunt Victoria had believed in me. And now, I finally understood why. I had reclaimed my empire, and no one would ever take it from me again.